The betrayal wasn't the sold house or the stolen car, it was the chilling realization that my 50-year investment in motherhood was worthless. They left me for dead. I was sitting on a hard, unforgiving bench in the waiting area of the specialist's office, the air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and unspoken fears, when my phone screamed. It was Vivian, my only child. I had spent 7 decades on this earth, 6 of them devoted to raising her. Her voice, usually a soothing melody, was now a brittle echo, sharp and final. Mom, listen closely. Tomorrow morning, Bryce and I are flying to the Côte d'Azur. We liquidated the lakeside cabin and the Thunderbird. We needed the capital, and frankly, we didn't want to be burdened. We deposited your portion. Goodbye. The line went dead, just 20 seconds of calculated cruelty. No explanation, no hug, not even a fabricated illness. 50 years of sacrifice, poured into the vessel of her life, and I was discarded like a piece of broken furniture, too old to be useful, too cumbersome to keep. My vision blurred, not with tears, I was beyond that, but with a sudden, searing clarity. I took a breath, slow and deep, and a strange, cold smile touched my lips. Because there was something my beautiful, manipulative daughter didn't know. Something my late husband, George, had ensured. My name is Eleanor Sterling. I am 71 years old, and until that precise, surgical moment of abandonment, I thought I understood the landscape of my own family. It had been only 6 months since I became a widow. George, my rock for 45 glorious years, had collapsed right into his coffee cup during breakfast. That morning, he had still meticulously prepared my coffee, just the way I liked it, a whisper of milk, 2 sugars, and toasted my favorite sourdough. His last words, delivered with a gentle kiss on my forehead, had been, "Good morning, my love. I'll always be here." Since that day, Vivian had woven herself back into my life like a comforting but ultimately insidious vine. She visited 3 times a week, oversaw the funeral details, managed the grocery deliveries, and even insisted I get this checkup. "Mom," she'd said, her eyes wide with what I had foolishly mistaken for concern, "you must take better care of yourself now that you are alone." Now, the mask was not only removed, it had shattered into a million sharp pieces. It was not affection, it was pure, chilling calculation, the lakeside cabin. It wasn't just a piece of property, it was the silent witness to our entire history. George and I bought it when Vivian was only 15. We spent every summer there, celebrating 30 birthdays and 25 Christmases. Vivian brought her friends, then her suitors, and finally Bryce. I cooked, I cleaned, I did the laundry. It was our sanctuary, the anchor of our family's soul. And to her, it was only a checkbook entry and the car. George's vintage 1955 Thunderbird, the color of aged port wine. He cherished that sedan like the son we never had. Every Sunday was a ritual, the meticulous wash, the wax, the religious oil change. He always parked it under the enormous oak in the backyard. Vivian knew, absolutely knew, how much that car meant to me. It was the last, tangible echo of George the First possessed. And she sold it for a quick flight to a glamorous coast. I remained frozen in that sterile plastic chair, surrounded by the quiet suffering of strangers, and the strangest thing happened, I didn't weep. Instead, a wave of profound, icy calm washed over me. The emotional shock had reset my soul, clearing the fog of grief that had blinded me for 6 months. And then, I remembered. Something I had completely submerged beneath the tidal wave of bereavement. 3 days before his fatal heart attack, George had placed a thick manila envelope into my hands. "Eleanor," he had said, his voice unusually grave, "put this deep in the study drawer. If anything happens to me, open it only when you feel truly ready. Promise me." After the funeral, amidst the deluge of sympathy cards and probate obligations, I had forgotten the envelope existed. But it was still there, waiting. I rose from the bench, my legs surprisingly steady, and walked out of the clinic without a word to the indifferent receptionist. I drove straight home. In the study, the drawer yielded the envelope instantly. My hands, which had trembled non-stop since George's death, were steady as I tore open the seal. Inside, there were far more than just insurance papers. There were meticulously organized legal documents, property deeds, bank certifications, and a handwritten letter, penned in George's familiar, elegant script. My beloved Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer by your side. Forgive me for keeping so much from you while I was alive, but I wanted to spare you worry. More importantly, I wanted to protect you from the very thing I feared most. Over the course of the last 20 years, I did not just invest our savings, I built an empire. We do not just own the lakeside cabin. We also hold title to 6 additional properties, including the entire apartment building where Vivian and Bryce live. Furthermore, we hold significant shares in 3 thriving technology companies. You, my love, are wealthy, in print and in reality. Immensely so. I was stunned. The sheer, audacious scale of his secrecy left me breathless. In his letter, George explained that he had hidden our true worth precisely because of Vivian. He feared that if she discovered the extent of our fortune, her ambition would destroy her moral compass. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. Because she believed we had nothing left to give, she had abandoned me that night. Sleep was an impossibility. I walked through the house, touching the familiar surfaces, staring into the faded eyes of family photos. The next morning, Vivian called again. Her voice was suspiciously soft, laced with forced tenderness. Mom, we've transferred the money from the house and the car into your account. It's not a lot, but it's enough for you to manage for a few months while you look for a smaller place. We took 70%. You get 30%. That's fair, right? We fly this afternoon. 30% of my own property. I felt the ice inside me harden completely. Safe travels, Vivian, I replied, my voice calm, almost detached. When she hung up, a sound erupted from me that I hadn't heard in months, a genuine, deep laugh. I laughed at the shameless audacity of my daughter and the staggering magnitude of her foolish error. That afternoon, I watched from the living room window as Vivian and Bryce, giddy and self-satisfied, hauled enormous, designer suitcases into an awaiting sedan. Not a glance back, not a wave. I returned to the kitchen, spreading George's documents across the worn oak table. I knew precisely what needed to be done. I called Mr. Harrison, George's longtime, utterly discreet lawyer. He had once told me, if you ever need an architect for justice, you call me. Today, I needed an architect for poetic justice. The following day, I wore the garnet-colored dress that George had always insisted made me look like an empress. It was a hue of sophisticated power, and as I studied my reflection in the full-length mirror, the woman staring back wasn't the grieving, timid widow of 6 months ago. She was Eleanor Sterling, a woman forged in fire and armed with silent knowledge. A new architect had risen, ready to build her kingdom and strategically dismantle another. Mr. Harrison's office, located high in a skyscraper that looked down on the entire city skyline, was a study in old-money elegance. Marble floors gleamed under the afternoon light, and the tall, intimidating windows framed the distant chaos of the city. Mr. Harrison, a man whose silver hair and quiet demeanor belied the razor-sharp legal mind beneath, greeted me with a professional, yet genuinely warm smile. But when I presented the thick folder containing George's meticulous papers, the smile evaporated. His expression shifted instantly from professional calm to stunned awe. Eleanor, he murmured, flipping through pages of deeds and stock certificates, this is beyond anything I could have possibly imagined. George was not merely smart, he was a strategic genius. He looked up, his eyes wide. Look here. According to these authenticated documents, you are the sole owner of, I know, Mr. Harrison, I interjected calmly, placing a steady hand on the mahogany table. I have read them. What I need to know now is not what I own, but what I can legally do. Quickly and discreetly. Mr. Harrison explained that every document was flawless. I was the legally designated, undisputed heir and owner of every single asset. He confirmed my suspicion. Vivian's sale of the lakeside cabin was not just morally reprehensible, it was fundamentally illegal. She had no right to liquidate the property. We can reclaim the cabin immediately, Eleanor. And you have grounds to sue Vivian for egregious fraud and theft, he advised, leaning forward earnestly. No, Mr. Harrison, I said, the word a soft, chilling rejection of that easy path. I will not sue my daughter. Not yet. I intend to handle this situation differently. I need you to keep every detail of George's true estate a complete secret for now. Can you help me maintain this necessary deception? He studied me for a long moment, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even admiration, in his eyes, before giving a firm nod. Of course, Eleanor. You are my client. You have the ultimate authority. Good. I need you to quietly and efficiently reverse the fraudulent sale of the cabin. Restore the title to my name. And most importantly, I need you to help me take direct, unquestionable control of all my assets, especially the apartment building where Vivian and Bryce currently reside. He calculated for a moment. The recovery of the cabin title can be expedited quickly, say, within 3 days, given the illegal nature of the transaction. Taking full direct control of the apartment building will be slightly more complex, as George structured it under a holding company, but it is perfectly feasible. It will require approximately 2 weeks for the necessary administrative changes. Very well. That timeline is perfect. And Mr. Harrison, I must reiterate, no one, especially not Vivian or Bryce, must know I am the one pulling these strings, at least until I give the final word. Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since George's passing. It was as if I had awakened from a long, paralyzing nightmare. I walked through the crowded, bustling streets, observing the city life swirling around me. For everyone else, it was just another day. For me, the world had fundamentally changed. I had a precise, beautiful plan. The following weeks were surreal. Officially, in the eyes of my small, judgmental community, I was the pitiful, poor widow, utterly devastated and abandoned by her callous daughter. Secretly, I was a supremely wealthy woman, a silent architect patiently reclaiming her entire empire. Mr. Harrison proved to be devastatingly efficient, calling me every few days with cold, clinical updates on the legal progress. I chose to remain in my own spacious house. I knew Vivian and Bryce assumed I would be forced to sell the family home and rent a miserable, small furnished room near the market. Each morning, I still ate my breakfast alone at the same sturdy oak table where George and I had shared countless meals. Afterward, I took my customary walk around the neighborhood perimeter. Neighbors greeted me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, the look universally reserved for widows who have suffered a public, humiliating tragedy. Elsa, my kind but overly talkative neighbor for 40 years, stopped me one sunny afternoon as I was watering my prize-winning hydrangeas. Eleanor, dear, she began softly, her voice heavy with practiced sympathy. I heard that Vivian abandoned you for Europe with that man, Bryce. Is that truly the case? Yes, Elsa, I replied, offering a strained, fragile smile. They went to the Riviera. They claimed they had a lucrative business opportunity over there. And how will you manage, dear? Everyone knows George wasn't exactly comfortable financially. I chuckled quietly to myself, a small, private sound. Don't worry your sweet head, Elsa. I will be just fine. If you need anything at all, a hot meal, help with the shopping, anything, you know you can rely on me. You are truly kind, but I am perfectly fine, thank you. Elsa gave me that signature look of pity, subtly mixed with a tiny, human dose of relief that the tragedy had struck next door and not her own family. These conversations became a common ritual, with the butcher, the baker, the lady at the dry cleaners. They all spoke to me in that same patronizing, pitying tone. I smiled, thanked them profusely, and inside, I quietly savored the performance. I was living a meticulously managed double life. Then, one crisp Wednesday morning, Mr. Harrison called. Eleanor, I have excellent news. The sale of the lakeside cabin has been successfully reversed. The buyers, who were innocent parties unaware of the fraudulent transaction, have been fully refunded. The property now legally belongs to you again. Wonderful, I said, the word ringing with quiet triumph. And the apartment building where your daughter resides? That is slightly more complicated. On paper, the property is held under the George & Company Investments Company name, but we now only require some final administrative signatures for you to assume direct, absolute control. It should take approximately 2 more weeks. Very well. Keep me regularly updated. I sat in the kitchen, sipping my cooling coffee, and considered Vivian. She had been in Europe for exactly 3 weeks. Not a single call. Not a text message. Not even a cheap, generic postcard. In her cold, calculating eyes, I had simply vanished the moment she had secured the money. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that the landscape was about to shift dramatically. The poor widow's performance was nearing its final, brilliant scene. I decided I needed to visit the cabin. Not to reminisce, but to solidify the emotional battle lines. I took the familiar suburban transit line out to the coast, the exact route George and I had traveled countless times, laden with laughter and picnic baskets. The sight of the property, small and welcoming, painted a gentle cream color with a wide porch facing the restless blue of the lake, hit me with a raw, unexpected force. I sat near the roadside, hidden by a cluster of weeping willows, watching the cabin for a quiet, excruciating hour. The memories assaulted me, little Vivian, barely 6 years old, painstakingly building towers of smooth, wet stones on the shoreline. George expertly grilling freshly caught fish on the old charcoal barbecue in the yard. Me, preparing the vast summer salads in the sun-drenched kitchen. Later, the less innocent years, Vivian bringing home friends, arrogant boyfriends, and finally Bryce. All of those priceless, irreplaceable moments had been coldly reduced to a fraudulent, swift cash transaction. An elderly gentleman, looking slightly confused, stepped out onto the porch, noticed me sitting quietly, and approached the fence line. "Are you quite all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, managing a faint, fragile smile. "Just reminiscing. Did you know the previous owners?" "Yes," I said, looking straight at the peeling paint of the porch railing. "I knew them exceedingly well." He shook his head, a gesture of lingering frustration. "We heard the poor old lady was gravely ill and had to sell quickly. A desperate, urgent sale. But then, after we'd settled in, we found out the contract was not legal. A complete mess. We were heartbroken, had to return the place and were refunded. We truly loved this little house." I smiled, my heart tightening with a fresh wave of bitter realization. Gravely ill. That was the narrative Vivian had fabricated, a story of a mother's impending death, used to cover the tracks of her monumental deceit. To my daughter, I had ceased to be a mother long ago. I was merely a problem, a disposable obstacle that needed to be neatly removed from her path to instant wealth. "As long as you didn't lose your money, that's what truly matters," I offered, a bland, non-committal response. On the bus ride home, the envelope of George's documents felt heavier in my purse than a block of concrete. It wasn't the property, it was the depth of the betrayal that weighed me down. Vivian hadn't just sold an asset, she had sold the lie of my illness. That evening, before the sun had fully set, I called Mr. Harrison again. "Mr. Harrison," I began, my voice cold and focused, stripped of all vulnerability, "I require one more thing. I want George's vintage Thunderbird back." There was a moment of silence on the line. "That will be considerably more challenging, Eleanor. The cabin was illegally sold, giving us clear legal standing. The car, however, was in Vivian's name, and she possessed a notarized power of attorney document, which you signed shortly after George passed. How could that possibly be?" I whispered, the accusation hanging heavily in the air. Harrison carefully explained the chilling truth. In the overwhelming, disorienting fog of grief following George's sudden death, Vivian had brought me a stack of papers, claiming they were merely routine funeral arrangements, insurance forms, and necessary inheritance procedures. In my state of emotional fragility and blind trust, I had signed without reading a single word, believing I was simply taking care of George's final wishes. It turned out, one of those pages was a broad, legally binding power of attorney, giving her full rights to liquidate personal assets. My own grief had been weaponized against me. "Is there any possible legal avenue to recover the Thunderbird?" I insisted. "Potentially. We would have to meticulously prove you signed the power of attorney under emotional duress, severe confusion, or clear exploitation. It will be a lengthy, expensive battle, Eleanor, built on emotional appeal rather than cold facts." "Then do it." Immediately. I want every single thing that connects me to George, every memory they tried to erase, returned to my possession. Whatever the cost. In the weeks that followed, I became a master of my meticulously crafted double life. In the mornings, I performed the role of the frail, struggling widow, shopping at the market with a carefully measured budget, accepting pitying glances, and chatting innocently with the neighbors. In the afternoons, I transformed into the shrewd, determined architect of my own justice, meeting discreetly with Mr. Harrison, learning about complex financial investments, and taking absolute control of a multi-million-dollar estate. I discovered that George was even more brilliant than I had ever realized. His investments were not impulsive, they were calculated, generational wealth moves. Every single one of his 6 properties generated substantial rental income, including the massive building where Vivian and Bryce had lived in entitled luxury. Meanwhile, Bryce, it turned out, was drowning in debt. Mr. Harrison's preliminary investigation revealed that Bryce had leveraged and mortgaged the apartment they occupied, an apartment he didn't even legally own, as the building belonged to George's company. If any bank or private lender were to discover the truth about the building's ownership, Bryce would be completely ruined. The entire foundation of Vivian's glamorous European business trip was nothing more than a desperate escape from catastrophic financial failure. One sharp Friday morning, the phone call I had been waiting for arrived. "Eleanor," Mr. Harrison announced, his voice carrying unmistakable professional excitement, "I have successfully secured the transfer. You now have direct, absolute control over every asset, every share, every property. And, through a carefully orchestrated transaction, I managed to buy back the Thunderbird." The current buyer was a friend of mine, a decent man, and when he learned the full, heartbreaking story, he agreed to release the car immediately. "It's sitting in a secure garage, waiting for you." "Excellent work, Mr. Harrison," I whispered, closing my eyes to absorb the wave of triumph. George's final, tangible memory was safe. "Now, Eleanor, I need you to do one final thing for me." "Anything, Eleanor?" "I want you to draft and dispatch an official, legally binding letter to Vivian. I want it delivered to her apartment building overseas, wherever they are foolishly sunning themselves." "What kind of letter?" he asked, a hint of steel entering his voice. "An eviction notice. A 30-day notice to vacate the premises. I want her out of that building immediately." Mr. Harrison hesitated for a brief, weighty moment. "Eleanor, are you entirely certain about this? She is, after all, still your daughter." "Mr. Harrison," I replied, my voice hard as diamond, "she threw me out of my own home with a single, cold phone call. She sold the last memory I had of my husband without a second thought. She treated me like garbage, believing I was nothing. Now, she must learn that every action, every single one, carries a monumental, inescapable consequence." That night, I barely slept. I kept picturing the precise moment Vivian would open that envelope. First, disbelief. Then, outrage. Finally, sheer, unadulterated fear. She would assume it was a terrible, bureaucratic mistake. But when she checked the documents, she would discover it was all chillingly, perfectly legal. The game had truly begun. The following morning, the phone rang precisely at 8 o'clock. It was Vivian. Her usual confident, almost arrogant tone was completely shattered, replaced by a desperate, frantic sound that scraped against my ear. "Mom. Mom, I need to talk to you right now. I just received the most insane letter. It says I have to vacate our apartment in 30 days. This has to be some kind of sick joke." I kept my voice carefully calibrated, a note of gentle surprise mixed with the mild confusion of an old woman. "An eviction notice, dear? How extremely odd. From whom did it arrive?" She was hyperventilating, struggling to read the letter's letterhead over the phone line. "A company called, wait, let me check. George and Company. Investments. Mom, have you ever heard of this company? Do you know anything about this terrifying letter?" I pressed my lips together, fighting the surge of triumphant laughter. George had named the holding company after himself. The sheer, beautiful poetry of it was almost too much to bear. "No, dear, never heard the name in my life." "Are you certain the letter is authentic?" Perhaps it's one of those terrible scams you see on the news. Vivian's voice dropped into a high-pitched, panicked whimper. Mom, I need your help. I have absolutely no one else. Mark, Bryce, he left me here in Europe. He ran off to Monaco with a 25-year-old hotel clerk, Mom. He just took his passport and vanished. And now, I'm facing this terrifying eviction back home. I don't know what to do. I have nothing left. I sighed, a long, weary sound designed to convey maternal disappointment and pity. Vivian had traded her entire family foundation for a man who was ultimately worthless, a coward hiding behind designer luggage. And now, she was paying a crippling, immediate price. I am sorry to hear that, Vivian. Truly, genuinely sorry, I murmured, choosing my words carefully. Where are you right now, Mom? Are you still at the house? Her voice was trembling, the sound raw and unstable. Mom, please. Can I come see you? I need to talk to someone. I have no one left to turn to. The irony was heavy enough to crush a diamond. Only after she had lost the very man for whom she had abandoned me did she suddenly remember that she still had a mother. This was the moment I had prepared for, the moment the prodigal daughter was forced to return not in triumph, but in abject despair. Of course, dear, I said, softening my voice to the tone she expected. This will always be your home. Come whenever you are ready. I'll take the next flight. I'll be there this evening. I hung up the phone and walked straight to the bedroom mirror. I had to ensure my appearance was exactly right for this crucial, agonizing performance. I exchanged my vibrant garnet dress for a plain, washed-out gray cotton shift. I tied my hair back into a simple, severe bun, erasing any hint of elegance or vitality. I practiced the expression of a worried, resigned, but ultimately kind mother, the poor, abandoned widow who had endured her suffering with quiet, humble dignity. When Vivian arrived, she would see precisely what she expected, a woman broken by grief and betrayal, not a woman plotting her strategic return. An hour later, as I was arranging some old family photo albums on the coffee table for added effect, there was a tentative, fragile knock on the front door. When I opened it, I was momentarily stunned, the breath catching in my throat. Vivian had not just been abandoned, she had clearly collapsed. She looked frail, with deep, bruised circles beneath her bloodshot eyes. Her expensive European designer clothes were wrinkled, stained, and utterly neglected. Her face was puffy, streaked with the tracks of recent, violent tears. Mom, she whispered, the single syllable snapping the composure I had so painstakingly constructed. For a flashing second, I thought she might rush forward and embrace me. But she stopped herself, the shame of how she had left us acting as an invisible, electric barrier between us. Come in, dear. You must be exhausted. Do you want some fresh coffee? Yes, please, Mom. I would be grateful. We settled in the kitchen, the same sturdy oak table where, just a few weeks prior, I had first read George's documents and laughed out loud at Vivian's stupidity. Vivian looked small, utterly diminished in the large wooden chair, reminding me fleetingly of the little girl who used to come home from school in tears over lost books or forgotten exams. Mom, I am so sorry for the way I left, she began, her voice cracking before she could finish the sentence. I know I treated you shamefully. I betrayed everything you and Dad stood for. It's all right, dear, I said, maintaining the voice of gentle forgiveness. No, it is absolutely not all right. I treated you horribly. I said unforgivable things. And now, look at me. I have absolutely no one left. And Bryce? I asked, forcing a tone of concerned interest. Vivian didn't just cry, she broke apart, collapsing into deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. He left me, Mom. He left me for that hotel waitress in Paris. She's only 25 years old. He lied about everything. There was never any lucrative business venture in Europe. It was all a complete, desperate fiction. He just wanted to run from his enormous debts back here and spend the money he got from selling your cabin and Dad's car. How much debt, Vivian? I asked, my gaze steady on her distraught face. A terrible amount, Mom. He owes close to $1 million. He leveraged and borrowed money for 3 years, using our apartment as the collateral. But now the lawyers are saying he was never even the true, legal owner. This was it. The door to the final lesson had just swung wide open. Real estate is notoriously complex, dear, I replied, allowing my brow to furrow with realistic concern. The banks and the private lenders are hounding me. They are trying to claim that because we were legally married, I am somehow responsible for a portion of his catastrophic debt, too. I have no money, I have no job, and now I have no place to live. She dissolved once more into hopeless tears. This time, the despair was profoundly real, entirely unfeigned. My mother's heart, a muscle I thought had completely calcified, ached terribly. I wanted desperately to reach across the table, to hold her, to tell her that with a single phone call to Mr. Harrison, I could erase this entire nightmare, but then, I remembered the cold, casual cruelty in her voice when she called me at the clinic. I remembered the speed and indifference with which she had sold George's cherished car. I forced myself to remain seated. Have you spoken to a lawyer about this eviction notice? I asked, pushing the conversation back to the legal reality. I cannot afford a lawyer, Mom. All the money from the sales was quickly spent in Europe. And Bryce, he took the small amount we had left when he abandoned me for that woman. So, what is your plan now, dear? How do you intend to proceed? She lifted her tear-streaked eyes, a raw, naked plea in them. I thought, maybe I could stay here with you for a while. Just until I can find some kind of employment and secure a small, inexpensive apartment. This was the request I had been silently anticipating, the perfect, necessary setup. After throwing me out of my life, selling my past, and treating me like an obstacle, she was now begging me for salvation. Of course, dear, I said, reaching out to gently touch her hand. This will always be your home, Vivian. That will never, ever change. Vivian looked at me, utterly surprised. Really, Mom? After everything I've done to you? You are my daughter, Vivian. Nothing can erase that fact. She burst into fresh tears, this time of profound relief and shame, and leaned across the table to hug me tightly. I returned the embrace, but in my arms, there was no weakness. There was only careful calculation, strategy, and the unwavering resolve of a woman determined to teach the hardest, most valuable lesson of all. That afternoon, she left to gather a few essential belongings from the now-doomed apartment. I sat back down in the kitchen, observing how easily the elaborate plan had unfolded. Vivian had returned exactly as George and I had feared and predicted, broken, desperate, and utterly without options. Crucially, she was still completely oblivious to the truth. She still saw me as the poor, pitiable widow. This was only the prelude. Allowing her to stay here was the flawless setup for the critical next stage of her education. That night, I called Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I need one more comprehensive task completed. I need you to launch a deep investigation into Bryce's entire debt portfolio. I want to know exactly how much he owes, to whom, and if there is any legal pathway to definitively separate those liabilities from Vivian's responsibility. It will require time and significant resources, Eleanor, but it is entirely doable. Good. And this must remain a secret. Absolutely no one can know I am the one financing this investigation or that I am the one behind the entire eviction process. Understood. But, may I ask what your ultimate, final objective is, Eleanor? My objective is simple, Mr. Harrison. I will ultimately save my daughter. But first, she has to truly understand what it means to hit absolute, unadulterated rock bottom. I poured myself a glass of the vintage Zinfandel that George had been saving for an occasion he called truly momentous. It had been a long time since I had encountered a moment so deeply special, so perfectly set for the culmination of justice. The game was in play, and for the first time since my husband's death, every single card was firmly and strategically in my hand. Vivian returned to the house that evening, not with the high-end luggage of her European trip, but with 2 modest canvas duffel bags, containing all that remained of her life. She looked exhausted, broken, and profoundly lost. The sight of her, sleeping on the guest room sofa she had once deemed too small for an au pair, twisted something deep within my own heart. Yet, the voice of the wise, protective mother, the one George had prepared me to be, insisted I maintain the necessary distance. The next few weeks were a relentless, agonizing lesson in consequence for Vivian. She spent her days cycling through 3 distinct, draining activities, applying for jobs, fielding increasingly aggressive calls from Bryce's creditors, and poring over the devastating eviction notice. The job search was a brutal, unending humiliation. Vivian, a woman who had never held a traditional job, having moved straight from an expensive private university to becoming Bryce's trophy wife and social coordinator, found every door slammed firmly in her face. "Mom," she confided one afternoon, sinking into a kitchen chair with a hollow thud, "I applied for a position as a receptionist at a boutique firm. They called back within 10 minutes to tell me they were no longer interested. The background check, it's all there. Bryce's lawsuits, the fraudulent sales, the massive outstanding debts. No one wants to risk hiring someone with that kind of legal history attached to their name." I watched her, my heart heavy with a complex blend of pain and pride. The arrogant veneer was gone, the entitlement had been scorched away by the heat of reality. She was finally, truly, facing the consequences of her choices. "Keep trying, dear," I encouraged gently, stirring my tea. "Rejection is simply redirection. You have strength you haven't tapped into yet." Meanwhile, Mr. Harrison's investigation was progressing with chilling speed. He called me regularly, always late in the evening when Vivian was either asleep or frantically searching job boards online. "Eleanor," he reported one evening, his voice low and serious, "Bryce's debt is catastrophic. He owes over $1,200,000 to 7 separate institutions and 2 private lenders. What's worse, we have definitive proof he used forged signatures, including what appears to be a clumsy forgery of Vivian's name, to secure the last $500,000 of the loan." I clutched the phone tighter. "Are you certain, Mr. Harrison? Forgery?" "Absolutely. The bank's internal security team had flagged the signature discrepancy even before Bryce fled. If we expose this fraud, we can legally sever all of Vivian's ties to his debt. She would be completely free, a victim rather than a co-conspirator." This was the opening I had been waiting for. The legal escape route. The way to save my daughter without using my own hidden money. But not yet. Not while she was still chasing an illusion of salvation. "Mr. Harrison, secure the evidence. Get the paperwork ready. But do not, under any circumstances, file it or say a word to Vivian. I need her to fully comprehend the weight of the predicament she created." "Understood, Eleanor. But this is cutting it close. The 30-day eviction deadline is approaching rapidly. The building will soon be forced to remove her belongings. That is precisely what I need to happen, Mr. Harrison. She must lose everything before she can truly appreciate what she has gained." The deadline arrived with a painful inevitability. The afternoon before the eviction, Vivian looked at me with an expression of complete, helpless terror. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I don't know what to do. The locksmith will be there tomorrow morning to change the locks. All my furniture, all my belongings, gone. I have nothing left in my name." I maintained my facade of empathetic helplessness, placing a comforting hand on hers. "I am so sorry, dear. I wish I could do more, but you know I have very little to manage on my own." That night, Vivian didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, tears silently streaming down her face, going through the remnants of Bryce's financial paperwork. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a sound that made my carefully guarded heart truly ache, the sound of a woman finding her deepest spiritual weakness. "Mom," she said, walking into the living room, "I found a job. A temporary one. The pay is minimal, barely enough to cover a small security deposit, but they don't do background checks. It's office cleaning. A night shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My daughter, who had once spent $10,000 on a single handbag, was about to mop floors. The pain was immense, but mixed with it was an overwhelming sense of vindication. She wasn't begging me for money, she was fighting for her own survival. "Are you going to take it, dear?" I asked, my voice wavering only slightly. "I have to, Mom. I have absolutely no other choice. If I don't start earning something, anything, I'll never be able to afford a place of my own. I refuse to keep relying on your kindness, especially after how I left you. I am proud of you, Vivian, I said honestly, the words coming from the deepest, truest part of my soul. This was the turning point I had prayed for, the moment when the entitled princess died and the dignified woman was born. The next morning, while Vivian was at the apartment, facing the final, humiliating reality of her eviction, having her keys changed, watching her old life sealed off forever, I called Mr. Harrison again. The time is almost right, Mr. Harrison. Today, she lost the last vestige of her previous life. Now, I need you to orchestrate the next move. I want her to find a lifeline, but one that she believes is a miracle, not a maternal handout. Understood. I will discreetly leak the information regarding Bryce's forgery evidence to the primary bank involved in the debt, the one handling the largest loan of $300,000. They will have every incentive to pursue this case on their own, to reclaim the money Bryce defrauded. Excellent. Let the system do the work. Let her see that justice is something that must be earned, not bought. That evening, Vivian came home, utterly defeated. She didn't cry, she just stared blankly ahead. They changed the locks, Mom, she said quietly. It's over. It's all gone. I'm so sorry, dear. It's my fault, Mom. Everything is my fault. I ruined Dad's memory, I ruined your trust, and I ruined my own future. What matters now is what you do next, Vivian. I start my cleaning job tonight, she said, a new, determined fire flickering in her exhausted eyes. I start over. From the bottom. I watched her put on the unflattering, oversized uniform she had been given. My beautiful, complicated daughter, marching off to face the world armed only with a mop and a profound sense of humility. A few hours later, Mr. Harrison called. The information has been successfully released, Eleanor. The bank is aggressively pursuing the forgery angle. They will be contacting Vivian soon, not as a debtor, but as a key witness and victim of fraud. The wheels of justice are turning in her favor, but she will believe she earned this rescue through her own misfortune. I hung up the phone, walked into the living room, and sat in George's favorite armchair. I closed my eyes, picturing him, his gentle, knowing smile. We did it, my love, I thought. She is finally learning the difference between the material and the profound. I raised my glass of Zinfandel to his silent memory. The poor widow was finally getting her happy ending. But the dramatic, tear-jerking revelation was still to come. I couldn't wait to see the expression on my daughter's face when she finally learned the truth. The transformation of Vivian was stark, painful, and utterly compelling to watch. She began her work as a night office cleaner, a woman who had once complained if the thread count on her imported linens was less than 800, now spending her evenings scrubbing the communal toilets and emptying the overflowing waste bins of a nameless corporate tower. She came home every morning at around 7 o'clock, exhausted, her face pale, her hands raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. But with the exhaustion came something new, a quiet, steely resolve. It's not so bad, Mom, she confessed one morning, collapsing onto a kitchen chair. There's a kind of dignity to it. It's honest work. I met another woman there, Maria. She's 65 and has been cleaning offices for 20 years to put her 3 children through college. She said to me, we all wear the same uniform here, honey. Doesn't matter if you came from a penthouse or the street. What matters is the work you do with your hands. She was right, Mom. I felt a surge of genuine, unfeigned warmth. This was the daughter George and I had always hoped to raise, a woman who valued effort over surface appearance, who found worth in the labor itself. The lesson was taking root, deep and true. Then, the manufactured miracle occurred. A sharp, professional envelope arrived from the First National Bank, addressed directly to Vivian. She stared at the letterhead with fear, believing it was another notification regarding Bryce's crushing debt. She nervously handed the letter to me. Read it, Mom. Please. I can't bear to look at any more bad news. I scanned the contents, though I already knew every meticulously planned word. The bank was writing to inform her that, based on their internal investigation, They had uncovered strong evidence indicating that her signature on the large loan documents was a forgery, likely committed by her ex-husband, Bryce. Vivian, I read aloud, making my voice tremble slightly with false astonishment. They say you might be a victim of fraud, not a debtor. They are pursuing Bryce for the full debt, and they believe they can legally free you from the obligation of the $300,000 loan. Vivian snatched the letter back, reading the words again and again. Her eyes widened, slowly filling with disbelieving tears. A victim, she whispered. I'm a victim? I don't have to pay that part of the debt. But, how? Who did this? Who investigated? The bank themselves, dear, I explained, my tone radiating humble awe for the complex efficiency of the financial system. They must have discovered the forgery when they tried to process the payments. It seems, Vivian, that sometimes, justice does find a way, even when we feel completely helpless. Vivian looked up at me, the first genuine, hopeful light I had seen in her eyes in months. This is a miracle, Mom. A genuine, absolute miracle. I still have the other debt to worry about, but this is a massive weight lifted. I can finally breathe. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison. The bank has done its part beautifully. Now, I need you to quietly ensure that the remaining $700,000 of Bryce's debt, the money owed to the private lenders and the smaller banks, is also systematically and quietly neutralized. I want all of it to vanish, leaving Vivian completely free. That will require a direct, targeted financial maneuver, Eleanor, Mr. Harrison advised. It will involve using George's funds to purchase the debt notes at a discount and then immediately nullifying them. It will cost over $500,000. Then do it, Mr. Harrison. I want her legally debt-free before the end of the month. She has learned the critical lesson, now, she deserves the reward for her moral transformation. I was sitting on the back porch a few afternoons later, watching the clouds drift lazily across the summer sky, when my old friend, Elsa, dropped by for tea. Elsa, my neighbor of 40 years, had always been the neighborhood's quiet, perceptive conscience. Eleanor, Elsa began, sipping her jasmine tea slowly, I saw Vivian this morning. She was standing at the bus stop, wearing that blue uniform. She looked tired, but different. Different how, Elsa? I asked, playing the role of the humble, unobservant mother. She looked humble, Eleanor. Really humble. And when she talked about her job, she spoke with a kind of pride. The pride of earning something honestly. I confess, when she left you for that man and sold the cabin, I thought you would never forgive her. Many in the neighborhood did. But here you are, sheltering her, supporting her through this terrible consequence. She's my daughter, Elsa, I replied simply, the old, familiar phrase carrying a new, profound meaning. Elsa set her cup down. I know, Eleanor. But I also know something else. What you are doing now, letting her fall, forcing her to face reality, that isn't weakness. That is the strongest act of motherly love I have ever witnessed. You didn't save her with money, you saved her by letting her find her own strength. Elsa's words struck me with the force of a revelation. She had grasped the core of George's plan, and my execution of it, without knowing the hidden wealth or the staged manipulation. My goal had never been about revenge, it had been about nurturing the essential integrity I knew Vivian still possessed. That evening, Vivian came home, carrying a small, brown paper bag. Mom, I bought you something, she announced, her cheeks flushed with genuine excitement. It's a little package of imported coffee. Not the cheap grocery store stuff. Maria told me where to get it. It cost $8, which is a fortune right now, but I paid for it with my own money. My honest money. I opened the bag, a wave of emotion washing over me. $8. A paltry sum compared to the millions I owned, but an act of love far more valuable than any diamond necklace. It's the best gift I've received in years, dear, I said truthfully, pulling her into a tight, warm hug. As I held her, I knew the time for the final act was rapidly approaching. The debt was being quietly wiped clean, the psychological lesson had been internalized, and her heart was finally open, raw, and ready to accept the truth. She had proven that she was not only willing to rise from the ashes, but that she could do so with dignity and humility. She had earned her salvation, the poor widow's performance was about to end. And the true Eleanor Sterling was ready to step out of the shadows. The following week, the final pieces of Mr. Harrison's intricate legal puzzle snapped into place. All of Bryce's remaining debts, the crushing $700,000 owed to the private lenders and smaller banks, had been strategically acquired and silently nullified. Vivian was officially, legally, and definitively debt-free, entirely unaware that the hand that had guided her to this freedom was mine. I knew the time was now. The lesson was learned. The bond had been reforged. Any further delay would cross the thin line from necessary discipline into unnecessary cruelty. I waited until Saturday morning. Vivian had finished her night shift, slept soundly for 6 hours, and was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of the precious, honestly bought imported coffee. She was reading the classifieds, no longer searching for frivolous European trips, but for permanent, honest employment. "Vivian, dear," I began, my voice calm but carrying an unmissable weight, "I need you to take the morning off from job searching. I need you to get dressed. We are going to see Mr. Harrison." She looked up, startled. "Mr. Harrison? Why, Mom? Is this about the rest of Bryce's debt? Did the bank finally find a way to clear the rest of it, too?" "I don't know, dear," I lied smoothly, maintaining the poor widow facade for the very last time. "But he called me and insisted that we both come to his office immediately. He said there are some final, important legal papers related to your father's estate that require both our signatures." Vivian was nervous during the entire drive downtown. She fidgeted with the hem of her simple cotton dress, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She was noticeably thinner, the stress and the exhausting manual labor having stripped away the softness of her pampered life. When we arrived at the massive, soaring skyscraper, the sheer opulence of the building seemed to intimidate her even more. Mr. Harrison's office was ready. He looked at me, a quick, silent signal passing between us, the architect and the executioner, and then turned his full, serious attention to Vivian. He directed her to a seat across the enormous mahogany desk and handed her a thick file folder, sealed with a prominent legal wax stamp. "Miss Sterling," Mr. Harrison began, his voice official and deliberately formal, "I have called you here today to discuss the findings of an independent, extremely confidential investigation into the liabilities and assets of your ex-husband, Bryce." Vivian's face was a mask of sheer panic. "The liabilities? You mean the rest of the debt?" "Precisely. Please open the file." Vivian carefully broke the seal, her hands shaking slightly. She began to flip through the pages. The first pages detailed the complete timeline of Bryce's debts, culminating in the stunning revelation of the forged signatures, the fact that she was indeed a victim of criminal fraud and utterly free from the initial $300,000 debt. She gasped, tears springing to her eyes, relief warring with shock. "I don't have to pay. It's true. They proved he did it." "That is absolutely correct," Mr. Harrison confirmed, nodding gravely. Vivian turned to me, her eyes wet with profound gratitude. "Mom, this is incredible. We are so lucky the bank caught this." "Wait," Mr. Harrison interrupted, pushing the next set of papers across the desk. "I have another matter to discuss. We need to finalize the formal transfer of ownership of several remaining properties belonging to your late father, George Sterling." Vivian, still euphoric from the debt relief, didn't immediately grasp the monumental significance of the next set of documents. She skimmed them, her brow furrowing with confusion. Then, she stopped. Her eyes fixed on a specific line item, detailing a large, multi-story commercial and residential property. "Wait, this address," she mumbled, her voice faint. "This is the apartment building where Bryce and I used to live. The one that sent the eviction notice." "That is correct, Miss Sterling," Mr. Harrison said. Vivian turned to me, her confusion now deepening into alarm. "Mom, what is this? Did Dad leave you the building? The eviction was legitimate? But why didn't you say anything?" I took a deep breath, looking straight into her eyes, ready to drop the final, earth-shattering truth. "Vivian, there is something I have kept from you. Something George instructed me to keep secret until the right moment. The truth is, your father left me far more than you, or anyone else, could possibly imagine. Mr. Harrison smoothly slid an even thicker folder across the desk. This one was marked Sterling Estate, Full Asset Disclosure. Miss Sterling, Mr. Harrison stated, his voice ringing with the gravity of the announcement, your mother, Eleanor Sterling, is the sole, undisputed owner of a financial portfolio worth over $200 million. The 6 residential properties, the stock certificates in the 3 technology companies, the offshore investment accounts, all of it belongs to your mother. Vivian picked up the file. She read, in dead silence, her expression cycling through disbelief, shock, and then a profound, deep-seated comprehension. She saw the deeds for the properties, the official bank statements showing the immense liquid assets, and finally, the legal confirmation that I had reacquired the lakeside cabin and the Thunderbird. She laid the file down, her hands carefully folded on the polished wood. Her eyes, no longer filled with panic or shame, but with a terrifying, absolute clarity, met mine. You knew everything, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Since the moment I called you from Europe and told you I sold the cabin and Dad's car. You were never poor. You watched me sell Dad's last memory, live in terror of my debt, and clean floors until my hands bled. And you stayed silent. Yes, I did, dear, I admitted, my heart aching but my resolve unshakable. How long, Mom? How long have you been silently watching this entire devastating performance? Since the day you abandoned me at the clinic, believing I was a dying widow with no money left. I didn't save you with money, Vivian. I saved you by letting you hit rock bottom, so you could finally learn how to stand up on your own 2 feet. Tears finally overflowed, but these were not tears of self-pity. They were tears of profound understanding, shame, and a searing realization of the monumental scale of her mother's hidden strength. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, concluding the formal matter. Miss Sterling, your mother took the extreme, necessary measure of protecting you. She financed the entire forgery investigation, paid for the recovery of your father's assets, and quietly nullified the entirety of Bryce's remaining debt of $700,000, the debt you thought the banks had simply forgotten about. You are completely free, financially and legally. Vivian wiped her face, the tears staining the pristine legal papers. She looked at me, not with resentment or anger, but with an expression I hadn't seen in decades, unquestioning respect. Mom, she whispered, the raw honesty in her voice tearing straight through the strategic wall around my heart. Do you forgive me? I forgave you long ago, Vivian, I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. Now, the only question that remains is, can you forgive yourself? I stood up, walked around the desk, and pulled my fully awakened, deeply humbled daughter into a long, tearful embrace. The poor widow was gone. The architect of justice had won. But the true, final victory was not in the money or the reclaimed assets, it was in the profound, unbreakable bond that had just been reforged between mother and daughter. We left Mr. Harrison's colossal office in the downtown skyscraper, descending from the clouds of immense wealth back into the real world. The silence between us in the elevator was profound, no longer strained by deception, but heavy with the weight of raw, absolute truth. Vivian was clutching the 2 massive files, the record of her debts and the testament to my staggering fortune. When we reached the street level, I turned to her. I can drive you home, or we can go somewhere quiet to talk. Let's just walk, Mom, she suggested, her voice still hoarse, yet carrying a new, steady resonance. I need to move. I need to process $200 million of inherited wealth and $1,200,000 of debt that vanished overnight. I need to process the fact that my mother is simultaneously the smartest woman I've ever known and the fiercest protector I've ever wronged. We walked in the direction of the city park, the midday sun warm on our faces. I watched her closely. The fear was gone. The frantic desperation that had characterized her since her return had evaporated. In its place was a quiet, almost meditative composure. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? She asked finally, her voice soft. When I was crying over selling Dad's jewelry, the family heirloom's worth almost $1 million, why did you let me do it when you could have simply signed a check? I stopped walking and took her hands, my gaze unwavering. Because, Vivian, George and I both knew that if I had simply paid off your debt, you would have seen me as an emergency fund, a permanent financial safety net. You would have left this house after the debt was cleared and done the exact same thing again, perhaps with a different man, but with the same pattern of entitlement. You needed to truly believe that you had lost everything. You needed to learn the value of a single, honestly earned dollar, the value of the family memories you sold, and the worth of the home you abandoned. And the cleaning job? The cleaning job, I confirmed, a flicker of genuine pride in my eyes, was the ultimate proof. That job gave you something my $200 million never could, dignity. You were proud to buy me that $8 coffee, weren't you? Vivian nodded slowly, tears welling up again, but this time, they were tears of cleansing, of acceptance. It was the first thing I bought with my own honest sweat in over 20 years. I thought I was paying for my mistakes, but I was actually buying my self-respect back. She was quiet for a long moment, watching a child chase pigeons near the fountain. So, what happens now, Mom? Do you expect me to quit the cleaning job and go back to a life of luxury? Do I move back into the downtown penthouse you own? This was the final test. The ultimate question of whether the lesson had truly stuck. I expect nothing, Vivian. The wealth is yours, eventually. The choices are yours, completely. You can have any life you want. You can start a business, travel the world, buy a mansion on the coast. Or you can continue to clean offices. The only thing I require is that you live a life of integrity, respect, and mature love. The rest is your decision. Vivian smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. Then I choose Maria, Mom. I choose the $8 coffee. I choose the dignity of the scrub brush. I choose to keep my job for a while longer. I need to finish what I started. I need to prove to myself that I can build my life, not just inherit one. Her decision was a victory sweeter than any financial gain. My heart swelled, realizing that George and I had not just rescued a daughter, we had forged a woman of genuine strength. That evening, I called Elsa. Elsa, I have a confession to make. The truth is far more complicated than the poor widow you know. I told her the entire, audacious story, George's secret wealth, the strategic game, and the final revelation in Mr. Harrison's office. Elsa listened in complete silence, occasionally letting out a quiet gasp. When I finished, she sat back in her armchair, her hands clasped tightly. Eleanor, she said finally, her voice firm, I thought you were a good mother when you took her back. Now, I think you are the wisest woman I have ever known. Most mothers would have simply paid the debt. You taught her the true cost of abandonment and the profound, irreplaceable value of the family she threw away. The next day, Sunday, was marked by another symbolic act. I drove my meticulously restored, gleaming port wine 1955 Thunderbird to the coast. We stood together in front of the little lakeside cabin. It looked perfect, exactly as George had left it. Vivian walked onto the porch, touching the familiar railing that her father had repaired so many times. Mom, she said, turning to me, a sudden, urgent passion in her eyes, I have a proposal. We own this house now. It's perfect. It's safe. It's full of love. Let's not just keep it for ourselves. What do you suggest, dear? I asked, anticipating the answer with a tight heart. Let's turn it into a shelter for women escaping domestic violence and financial abuse. A place where they can come and start over, just like I did. A place where they can find dignity and self-respect through honest work and guidance. That's what Dad would have wanted. A legacy of true, functional value, not just money. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This decision, to turn the greatest symbol of her past betrayal into a foundation for the future healing of others, was the final, magnificent proof of Vivian's complete metamorphosis. That is the most beautiful thought I have ever heard, Vivian, I managed to say, pulling her into a fierce, celebratory hug. Let's build that, my love. Together. As the sun set over the vast, shimmering lake, painting the sky in a blaze of hopeful color, we sat on the porch. We were no longer Eleanor the strategist and Vivian the prodigal. We were two strong women, mother and daughter, bound together not by blood alone, but by a shared, hard-won understanding of respect, love, and purpose. The empire George built was no longer just a collection of assets. It was a powerful engine for genuine, redemptive justice. The following 3 months were the most invigorating of my life since George's passing. The transformation was complete. I was no longer the poor widow, and Vivian was no longer the lost, entitled socialite. We were partners, united by a profound, shared mission, transforming the lakeside cabin into the George Sterling Haven, a safe house for women finding their footing after escaping financial and domestic abuse. Vivian threw herself into the project with an intensity she had never applied to anything before. She kept her night cleaning job for a surprising 7 more weeks, insisting that the meager income, now purely discretionary, given my financial revelations, was essential for her self-respect. She was using the time to network with the other cleaning ladies, hearing their painful stories, realizing her own immense privilege, and shaping the Haven's mission statement. "Mom," she explained one evening, her eyes alight with purpose, "the Haven needs to be about more than just a roof. It needs to teach independence. I want to build a job training program right there, using my own disastrous experience as a cautionary tale." I funded the necessary renovations immediately. Mr. Harrison worked closely with us, meticulously navigating zoning laws and securing nonprofit status for the foundation. Vivian personally oversaw the structural changes, painting the rooms herself, hauling in donated furniture, and setting up a small library filled with books on financial literacy and career planning. She worked tirelessly, sometimes for 12 hours a day, fueled by commitment, not desperation. My role, true to form, became the silent financial anchor. I wrote checks without hesitation, $300,000 for the initial renovations, another $100,000 for the first year of operational costs, all sourced from the vast empire George had quietly constructed. Every time I signed a check, I felt George's presence, his quiet approval echoing in the study. One cold, gray afternoon, as Vivian and I were sorting through a delivery of fresh linens for the Haven, Mr. Harrison called me, his voice unusually somber. "Eleanor, I have some news regarding Bryce. It's important that you hear this directly from me." My heart, which had just begun to enjoy a period of tranquility, instantly tightened. "What is it, Mr. Harrison? Did he try to resurface?" "Worse, I'm afraid. The French authorities, following up on the forgery charges we enabled the bank to file, located him in a remote section of the French Riviera. He was attempting to secure a permanent residence visa through a sham marriage to a local woman. And the authorities arrested him. He was charged not only with marriage fraud but also with the international wire fraud related to the bank loans. He has been sentenced to 3 years in a correctional facility in the south of France. Furthermore, the local authorities there determined he had no remaining assets to liquidate. He is, for all intents and purposes, entirely ruined." I hung up the phone and looked at Vivian, who was still innocently humming a tune while folding bath towels. Should I tell her? Did she need to know the fate of the man who had nearly destroyed her life? I decided that she did. She deserved to know that the chapter was closed, legally and definitively. "Vivian, dear," I began, my voice soft. "I have just received a final update on Bryce." She paused, folding the towel neatly, and looked up at me without a flicker of anger, hatred, or even sadness. Her gaze was purely neutral, completely detached. "He's been arrested, hasn't he?" she asked simply. "Yes. He was sentenced in France to 3 years for fraud and other related charges. He is no longer a factor in your life, legally or personally." Vivian returned to folding the towel. The action was slow, deliberate, meditative. "I feel nothing, Mom," she confessed finally, her voice carrying a profound sense of closure. "No revenge, no anger, no satisfaction. That man, and that life, feels like it happened to someone else, someone who lived 20 years ago. He made his choice, and he is facing its consequence. My consequence is here." She gestured around the small, stripped-down room of the future Haven, "and I choose to build from it." This was the final, definitive sign of her moral recovery. She had achieved not merely forgiveness, but utter indifference to the person who had wronged her, a true emotional liberation. That evening, as we sat on my porch, enjoying a glass of sweet iced tea under the first crisp autumn moon, I pulled out a small, velvet-covered box. "Vivian," I said, placing it in her hands. "When your father and I opened the safe deposit box, the one where George kept some insurance information, there was a small selection of jewelry. You sold most of it to pay off Bryce's urgent debts." "I know, Mom. It still makes me ill to think I sold Dad's family memories for that lowlife." "You kept 2 pieces. The small pearl necklace your grandmother left you, and this." Vivian opened the box. Inside, resting on the velvet lining, was my original engagement ring, a simple, timeless platinum band set with a single, perfectly cut diamond of just over 2 carats. It was the only item from the safe deposit box she had refused to sell. "I kept it for you, Mom. It was too important to sell. It represented the only true love I had ever witnessed." I smiled. "I know, dear. But I want you to have it. Not as an engagement ring, but as a symbol of your new, truer self. Wear it as a reminder of the strength you found when you thought you had nothing left to lose. Wear it as a symbol of the immense, unconditional love that George and I always held for you." Vivian slipped the ring onto her right hand, her thumb tracing the smooth platinum band. "It will be my new beginning ring, Mom. The one I earned by finding my own value." A wave of peace washed over me, a feeling that had been absent since George's death. The strategic game was over. The lesson was complete. Justice had not come in the form of revenge, but in the magnificent, beautiful form of redemption. The next morning, the sign was officially unveiled at the lakeside cabin, the George Sterling Haven, a center for dignity and independence. I stood beside my daughter, watching the local press take photos, watching the first 3 women timidly walk across the porch and enter the house. They were broken, scared, and absolutely without hope. But they were walking into a home, a haven built not on inherited wealth, but on the profound, hard-won wisdom of a daughter who had learned the true meaning of value. The George Sterling Haven was not merely a shelter, it became a living, breathing testament to the power of a second chance. Vivian, now known by the local community as a compassionate leader and an inspiring success story, ran the center with an authority and sensitivity that came directly from her own profound suffering. She had found her true vocation, leveraging her past mistakes into a beacon of hope for others. I, too, found my new purpose. I managed the financial aspects of the George & Company Foundation, ensuring the Haven had an inexhaustible supply of funding and resources. My life, which had felt hollowed out by grief and subsequent betrayal, was now overflowing with meaningful activity. George's hidden fortune had been successfully activated, transforming from sterile numbers on a spreadsheet into tangible, redemptive aid. 6 months after the Haven officially opened its doors, Vivian received a final, strange piece of mail, a letter from the French correctional facility where Bryce was serving his sentence. She brought it to me in the living room, holding the cheap, flimsy paper with detached curiosity. "It's from him, Mom." A final word. "Are you going to read it, dear?" I asked, looking up from the investment report I was reviewing. "I have to. Just to close the book completely." Vivian opened the letter and read silently. It was a rambling, self-pitying narrative, filled with desperate pleas for forgiveness and a demand for financial assistance to hire a better lawyer. Bryce claimed he was a victim of circumstance and blamed the entire catastrophic collapse on external forces. He mentioned me only once, referring to me as "that stone-cold old woman." Vivian finished reading and calmly tore the letter into dozens of tiny pieces, dropping them into the fireplace. "What did you learn from that, dear?" I asked, my voice gentle. "I learned that some people don't change, Mom. They only rearrange their excuses. The woman who married him doesn't exist anymore. I wish him peace, but I have absolutely nothing left to give him. My focus is entirely forward now." Her composure was absolute. No anger, no resentment, only profound, quiet strength. I realized that the healing was complete that night, after Vivian had left to prepare a late meal for the 5 women currently residing at the Haven. I sat in George's armchair, a quiet sense of triumph settling over me. I looked at the photograph of my late husband on the mantelpiece, his kind eyes, his knowing smile. "We did it, my love," I whispered to the empty room. We didn't just protect her inheritance, we protected her soul. The ultimate victory of this arduous, heartbreaking journey wasn't the retrieval of the assets or the downfall of Bryce. It was the unshakable bond that now defined my relationship with Vivian. We were no longer bound by transactions, expectations, or blood alone, but by shared wisdom, mutual respect, and a common purpose. She had learned that true value does not reside in the bank accounts or the beachfront properties, but in the internal resilience, the willingness to work, and the integrity with which one faces hardship. I, in turn, had learned that sometimes, the greatest act of love is the hardest one, the courage to step back and allow the ones you cherish to face the fire, so they can emerge, finally, as gold. The story of the poor widow and the prodigal daughter reminds us that betrayal within the family is one of the most agonizing experiences a person can face. Yet, it is often in the deepest, most devastating brokenness that the foundation for a truly mature, honest, and lasting love is laid. We must understand that forgiveness is not about instantly erasing the mistake. It is about extending patience and allowing the time and space for genuine change and growth to occur. So, I offer this perspective to you, my dear viewers, especially those of you who have navigated the stormy seas of family crisis and betrayal. Do not be afraid of the fall. When a crisis hits, when a loved one makes a monumental mistake, your first instinct as a mother is to shield them with your resources. But I ask you to consider an alternative. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance you can pass down is not money, but the unwavering certainty that they possess the inner strength to rebuild their life from zero. Let the consequence be the painful, necessary teacher. Ask yourself this: in your own family, what do you truly believe holds everyone together? Is it material wealth, the fancy houses and the security of a large savings account? Or is it unwavering respect, the courage to speak hard truths, and the genuine love that allows for ultimate growth? I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between protecting a loved one from pain and allowing them to learn the deepest, most painful lesson? What was the outcome? Share your wisdom and experiences in the comments below. Let us continue to talk, learn from one another's journeys, and grow together as a strong, insightful community. And if you would like to keep walking with me, listening to more heartfelt and meaningful stories like this, stories that reveal the true, complex landscape of family, love, and redemption, don't forget to follow, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter.